Welcome back to another episode of the Attitude Makeover podcast, the CXO series. I've been striving to really bring in perspectives of CXOs from various genres, whether it is the creative side, an individual trying to make a mark for themselves, or a larger organization, and also entrepreneurs. In the last 1 year, as I went about setting up Attitude Makeover, there's been a massive transformation in terms of self discovery and the process of understanding who am I, what is my bigger purpose, and the values I bring to the table. This guest that I'm bringing today in our podcast is Sandhya Shekar, the makeup artist of the who's who of Bollywood, whether it is Deepika Padukone, Anushka Sharma, and many more. But I'm not going to talk about makeup. I'm going to delve deeper into the art and the process of self discovery. Dwelling into a personal journey that Sandhya went through, coming from a small town in Mangalore called Kalyanpur to who she is today. Her journey has been inspirational and also has its own ups and downs. As we go through this conversation, we understand the various drivers and pillars that one need to be cognizant of when going through a self-discovery process, whether it is awareness, introspection, having the right support system, the balance that one needs to maintain, and then how do you find your creative self in this process? How do you enjoy this journey? This and much more is what we're going to talk about in today's CXO series conversation with Sandhya Shekar. As always, I hope you like this. I hope this has at least sown a seed of thought process in your mind of really venturing into the magnificent world of discovering yourself. We're not thought about this. We don't talk much about it, but it is a very crucial process that we go through in our mid-career journey, and we can't avoid it. So here's a conversation that might help you in your own journey. As always, if you've liked this, please do subscribe, like, and share. It means a lot to a podcaster like me. Thank you again. All right. So
Deep breaths.
I have starting problem. Okay, serious starting.
Should I introduce you?
Go ahead.
Okay, so your introduction, I don't even know your full name, but here is Saujanya. So I met Saujanya less than a year ago on my trip to I think I was there on her trip to Goa, and we had the most beautiful first time connection.
Yes.
It was just we kind of knew each other from another time, another space.
Yeah.
And we just started chatting, and that's when Saujanya was talking about this beautiful podcast. And I thought you had already started it by then, but that's very little or so little that I know about you. But the later story of her actually starting the podcast and getting to know it on social media and been following here and there, and I think you've come a long way, and I think it's brilliant what you have unfolded in the last few months.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So inspirational. Yeah, so
Thank you,
inspirational.
thank you. I'm very honored to have you here. I'm not
you.
taking this conversation very lightly at all. It's a total privilege to have you here. I think that day we hit it off. First, what caught my attention is I think you're very successful and yet so easy to connect. It was not like, oh, I am Sandhya, and it was so easy to connect. And there was a journey, like when you said I grew up in Kalyanpur, that's where my aunt lived, and most of my summer vacations were there. And from Kalyanpur to the Met Gala, I was like, wow, that is somebody who's had a lovely journey. And I thought that is what we need to talk about today, on how to go about discovering yourself. Before we get into that as a subject, Sandhya, who's Sandhya?
Okay, I think I tried thinking about this before coming here, but I was like, I'm just going to like let it flow.
Yes, it's a better way.
I think for me, I recognize or I identify myself to be this small town, or rather, not even small town. I call myself the village girl.
Yeah.
That's my way of putting. Like I'm a villager. That's what my go-to, um, and who's been on like who's very curious, who is very adventurous, who's very fearless. I think these are pretty much these three adjectives kind of describe me. But small time villager trying, seeking out new adventures in life. I think that's pretty much me. Yeah.
Now, I can relate with that because for 25 years, when I introduce myself, I would always introduce myself as Saujanya, and then the company I work with,
Yeah.
and then the job profile that I'm doing. And never went back to reflect on who am I.
Right.
And it's only this last year that I've gone around discovering that bit, and it's been beautiful. Curious, explorative,
Right.
pretty creative, and then I like looking at the big picture. I like seeking big picture. So
Right.
so much is synergy here. When you started, for my audience, Kalyanpur is this small town, village. Yeah, it's in
Yeah.
that borderline on
Yeah.
the outskirts of Udupi, what, about 6 kilometers from Udupi
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something? And it's a fisherman sort of a place. Um, my aunt used to be there, so all my holidays were completely there. When you told me you're from Kalyanpur and you've had this journey, the first thing that struck me is, wow, that is a very interesting journey to step out from a small village all the way to who you are today.
Right.
What have been instrumental things that took you from there to where you are today?
I think I'm 38, so it's a long journey, definitely. But I think, again, being growing up in the village, I think I always dreamt big. I think there was always this thing of curiosity of what's the world like outside, and I think that kind of kept me going in terms of seeking a lot of like new experiences, meeting people, being intrigued by their lives. And I think largely, mostly when people were not from that space, like, like I said, the schooling as well, there were a lot of like NRI kids, and there were a lot of like these kids who were like on the transfer jobs. And I'd always connect a lot more to them because that was the world that was not the world of internet. And my only medium was like to talk to these guys and be like, okay, what is it like to live outside? And I think I learned a lot from these, especially those kids, because their lives was very different from, say, the rest of the Mangalorean kids that were coming to the school. So I think that was a starting point. And I think just being an observer of like, you know, other people's interests, other people's drives, I think that was the starting point. But I think going from, say, I still call it Uru to, the big city jump, I think typical South Indian upbringing in terms of I did my MBA, I did a corporate job. That's what I was told, or that's what I did. I still love finance. I think that's somewhere in my blood because Dad has a very innate interest towards that, and I feel there is part of that in me. But I also realized very soon into the corporate life that that is not my journey. I didn't fit in over there, and I think the rebel in me was like, okay, what next? Like, I definitely didn't want to be in a job where I was under somebody, taking orders from somebody. I wanted something to be where, I was my own boss and have a rather free flow to my life on an everyday basis. And I think the first thing that came to me was, let me do makeup. I did have an innate interest to that growing up, but I think growing up in a small village, I didn't really know that this can be a career. And much later on, I think only when I moved to Bangalore, I saw my hairstylist was a very successful hair and makeup artist in Bangalore, working with the best teams in the country. I had a very dear friend. I have a dear friend, Sitara. I think I can never stop thanking these two people, because I think that was the time something shifted for me, watching them, see them, what they did, and the passion in which they did it. And I was like, okay, this is a career. Maybe I can jump into it. I see some kind of interest. And I think when I was in that moment of breaking away from the corporate thing, I was like, I'll do makeup, I'll do a few bridal jobs, sustain myself. The first thought was, I don't want to go back home because my parents will get me married. You know how it is, right? So, what do I do to pay my rent, to pay my bills, and then be away from home and, sustain that thing for a long time? And I was like, okay, makeup, bridal. I know at least few people who'll get married in a month, and, it seems manageable. So, that's how my thing started. And I came back once I learned I was in Bangalore. I wanted to be in Bangalore, didn't ever want to leave Bangalore because I love Bangalore so much. But unfortunately, people were so close-minded here that they didn't want to try anybody new. And I was like, I'll work for free. I'll do whatever you want. But no, nothing came through. And I think it pushed me to go to Bombay. And Bombay was like super welcoming, like super, super welcoming. And before I know, one thing led to another, and I think 13 years have gone by. And yeah, somewhere in between, Met Gala happened, Cannes happened, and this is where I am.
It's a lovely journey. I'm sure it's got its ups and downs as well. One thing that I found when you go through a journey of this kind, a couple of things that come to my mind. One is your relationship with money, and the second is your core values, because that sort of becomes a foundation in some ways to how you carve out your journey itself. What's that been like for you?
Um, I guess I think the first part of it, in terms of the money bit of it, I think I did have those doubts. I think leaving a corporate job where you have a steady income, all of that, and moving to something where you're just like, you don't know where your next
Gig is
check
like-
is going to come from or where you're going to pay your bills. So I think that was a little bit scary, but I think my soul was dying inside, and I was just like, I can't sit in this mundane, boring Monday meetings of I'm just staring at people's faces where I'm just wasting time. And I think for me, for the lack of a better word, it was literally soul killing. Like constantly the inner voice telling, what is that I'm doing? That's really started eating me up. And I was like, I'm going to do this jump, and whatever happens later, I'm going to figure it out. I think I've always had this core value. I think now that I'm talking about it, is I'll figure it out has always been one of the most important things. And I think backed by the fact that I was always fearless. I think very early on as a child, I've developed a thing of listening to my intuition. And even in the middle of like all the chaos between, say, my parents saying something to anything that's being said to me, I think I tuned into my inner voice very early on. And I always felt that every time I listened to that, like things pretty much turned out. I was happy. I don't know if it turned out right or wrong, but I think I'd taken this thing of I'm responsible for this now. And I think that in a way kind of makes you stronger.
Yeah.
That I'm ready for anything. And then there's a plan B and a plan C that happens automatically to get yourself out of any kind of like trouble that you'd set for yourself. So that was like, I'd say early on in life. But that, I think I was looked as a rebel because it was like, she speaks too much, or like she's too much. That's what I was told all the while. Or she's too angry, or she's too vocal. But I think that was like the core value of like, I'm going to do this. If not, if it doesn't work out, I'm going to go back to say my degree. And I think also I'd set that one thing back then. I remember where, worst come worst, if nothing works out,
You can go back.
I'll go back. But I was like, what's the worst form of job I can do? And I'm not kidding. I was like, I think I can clean a toilet.
I did this. So for me, it was like, what's the worst that I can do? I can do a receptionist job. It's pretty easy. You give you some money, that is good enough. And then you can figure out the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, also, the dignity of work, I feel, in terms of, for me, no work is small or big. I think it's a passion that you carry in terms of doing something. And I think even like if you're cleaning the floor or giving somebody a cup of coffee as a waitress, it's like, I think it's a passion that you bring in. I think that is more important. So for me, my worst case scenario back then was like, what's the worst job? Cleaning a toilet? I was like, okay, ready to do it. So yeah, money definitely was a struggle, but I think I just dived into it. And I feel that was the only way of doing it. I don't think if I did like, I'll do this and this, I don't think I'd have given it my 100%. And I think core values would still be, for me, of being fearless, and it's one life. And for me, I think the guilt of not having done at that particular point, that would definitely eat me up couple of years later.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, I'll do it. Whatever happens, I'll figure it out later. So yeah.
And were you from a very well-off background, or like a middle class? Just to sort of set the context of the journey, were you really well off in the beginning itself, or like how was it?
I think so. Just to give a background of where I come from. So I come from this really small place called as KG Road, which is like, I think 5 minutes from Santikate. It's the next stop. So that was a bus stop, and where we lived was 40 minutes walking inside. And it's literally like the most beautiful place now when I think of it. Beautiful farm, but it was also close to a river, which means that in the monsoon, it's like this massive stream connecting to the river. So by the time you got out of your, like, we didn't even have a gate, but we had this massive thing. You get in and you're like fully wet, like, as toddlers. And I came from a place like that, but I think to give you a thing of where the kind of setting, I think we'd call ourselves middle class, but again, the kind of lifestyle that we led, I think it was more of a lower middle class. I think also coming from a South Indian thing, you're always very conservative about, you never like to say that, oh, we have money, that's like, you can't be too happy, which means there's a problem, It's always underrating whatever, discounting what you have, right? So that's a kind of background I came from, and money was always like, it wasn't like money was easily available. But I also remember being a rich kid back then, because I had all my uncles were into like bar and restauranting, and we'd always get like hefty pocket money. Like every time they'd come down, we'd get like $1,000 as pocket money. So as a kid, I remember having 5,000, 8,000 as pocket money, which was too much for the village, because I didn't know what to do with that money. We were never allowed to go out. We had a school bus picking us up at like 9 in the morning, and, finishing work at like 5. And we never really went out to spend that money. So, but the upbringing was totally, totally like, I'd say lower middle class. Everything was valued for. You couldn't waste anything. Before you spent your money, you had to be accountable for everything. And again, discounting the fact that, okay, don't show off your money and things like that. And I think that kind of continued pretty much till we were like in college, and I think somewhere that value system gets imbibed in you. So even if you're making money, then you're like, okay, this is what is being told, this is always there subconsciously in your head. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you decided to take the plunge and go through this whole self-discovery, you were pretty young at that time. See, I'm going through it at 46. You were what, in your late 20s, early 20s?
I was 25.
Wow.
Yeah, I was 25. I don't even call that a self discovery back then. I think it was just the undressed in me was just so like loud and like clear that I was like, I can't sit in that goddamn corporate like office. I can't be around men. I can't be taking orders. I think it was just, the voice that I don't want to be doing any of that. And I think that was purely that which kind of drove me. And I wouldn't even call it like a journey that, like, maybe now in hindsight, yes, there was a shift that happened, and but it's for me it was just like, okay, I'm just changing careers, and but definitely I think now when I look back, tuning my inner voice, my intuition, is something that I started on very early on as a child. And I think also, I don't know about you, but I've seen like my own parents, I feel they were very young to have kids, and they were not very, when it came to decision making, I don't think they took the best decisions for us. And I think for me, it was always about what is that is good for me. And I started making those decisions for myself. Again, that's why I was called a rebel, but I was like, I don't care. This is making me happy.
I can relate with so many of this. Like in my house, are you an Aquarian?
I'm a Gemini. That's why we get along so well.
So I have always been a rebellious one. And my mom always asks me, why can't you be like
others, normal kids?
Why can't you just be a normal girl? Why are you so different? But I think I can totally relate with that, because especially after you step out of your home and you start working, your identity starts getting refined, and you're sort of constantly exploring that. And for me, it's been like, okay, this time I'm going to explore this kind of a stuff, and again next one, and each one leads to the other in a lot of ways. Has that been how gradually your transformation has gone through, or did you like sort of skip a few steps?
I think it's been gradual, Saujanya. For me, it's like I feel a more conscious thing towards self-discovery has only happened when I was in, say, in my early 30s. But I can term that, like, I started my self-work in a proper, like, seeing somebody, or like a legit way of like, it started off with seeking help, because I think the whole transition of moving from my corporate job to makeup was so hard on me, in the sense that coming from a conservative family, again, my mom stopped talking to me for 6 months. My parents didn't understand what I was doing. The remote thing that they knew was they're like, oh, she's going to become a beautician.
Like
that's
Sharda.
yeah, like yeah, like a
about,
beautician auntie close by. And they were like, are you going to open a beauty parlor? Are you going to open a salon? That kind of questions. I was like, no, I'm becoming a makeup artist. And then the remotest, like the only person that they knew who did something like that was the theater guys, or people who do makeup for drama and everything in Uru, and there was this guy called Budan Sahib who used to come to our school, and he used to do our makeup during school days. And so like, oh, you're becoming Budan Sahib, and I was like, kind of, like that's still something close to, but again, he was kind of like looked down upon, because he was the straight man doing makeup, and again, like the religion coming into place, because it was Muslim and whatever, straight out, like, what are you getting into kind of a thing. And so I guess for me, that was the hardest part with my family, where they just didn't understand. And the most dramatic part of it was I turned 25 on June 11th. I'm forgetting my birthday, guys. June 11th. And I took, after my 3 months of notice period at Yes Bank, I had 2 months to be like, I'm going to go home, convince my parents the right way. I'm also trying to be a good daughter, because I've always been like, oh, you're a rebel, you're this, you're that. And I'm trying to do it right. And I've gone home to tell them that I want to do this and try to convince them. And my parents were like, my dad was still kind of okay, because he's like, she's anyway going to do what she wants to do. But my mother was more of the controlling kinds. And she is like, every day was a new drama, crying, screaming, howling, all of that. And in my head, I'm like, what is that I'm trying to do? Why is there so much drama? And I think June 11th, I'd spoken to this hairstylist friend of mine, Prabhat, and he was not teaching at that point in time. I was like, Prabhat, you need to teach me, And he agreed. He kept like 2 weeks. Exactly on June 11th, I was like, this is it. I have booked my tickets to Bangalore. I was taking a bus to Bangalore, and I remember my sister having this birthday cake, and I'm like walking out of the house because my parents are still not convinced. My mother is crying, and I'm like, am I pregnant? Why is she crying? Like, what have I done? Those kind of stuff. Then I was like, okay, melodrama, get out of it, focus on what you want to do. So I've just walked out, gone there, and then after that I went to 2 weeks was done. I was like, okay, I really love this. I think I want to kind of venture and learn more. And that's when I was like, I saw this course in Bombay, and then I think my mother was having palpitations, where she was like, okay, now she's going to get into the big bad Bollywood world, and she's never going to come back, that kind of stuff. And she's like, not married, how am I going to find a boy? All those things that goes in. So I was going and enrolling in another course there. And I remember her calling and howling and being like, don't do this, and, trying to get me off that. I just went ahead and did that. And so that was, I think, very hard. And she was really upset with me for almost 6 months. She didn't speak to me. And then my family interaction was very, very, very minimal. I was also going through this whole change of, the unsurety of the new job, of whether I will sustain. I didn't really save up. I was a big party girl when I was in the banking world. I used to party from, say, Saturday, literally 6 days a week. Monday was the only day that I didn't party because places were closed. And I'd blown up all my money, and but then I was doing this change, and I was so unsure of the money situation of that. And I think all of that took a really big toll on me. And that was my early onset of depression, which I didn't know. But I remember being in Bombay and being like, I don't feel okay. But I thought that it was all, being in a new city, new place. And I remember that went on for a long time. And it's only when I was 32, I think, I was clinically diagnosed of depression. And I think from the age of 27 to 32, I kept going to doctors and being like, I don't feel okay, something is off. But them telling that, it's hormonal, you're going through this. And I never got a straight answer, and I kept going to different doctors. And I think that was the hardest part for me in terms of the whole transition and what my body, physically, mentally, and emotionally that I went through. But I think that is what actually led to my self-discovery, and that whole introspection and the journey and everything, I think, started when I was diagnosed for me, it was like, okay, finally somebody has an answer, and I'm like, okay, now I know what I need to do. And I started off with therapy. Therapy didn't really work for me at that point in time, because I had a lot of deep-rooted traumas that I was carrying with me from childhood, adulthood, as a teenager, moving to a new city, a lot of things. And one thing became another, and the traumas were such deep-rooted traumas that I think therapy at that point didn't help. But it definitely was an opening And life also kind of put me through certain, situations where when I started seeking help at the age of 32, I went through a very hard life lesson where I partnered with somebody from the US to do a workshop, and I got conned of a lot of money. The workshop was brilliant. It was one of its kind in terms of the kind of makeup workshop that had happened, because there were some of the coolest artists, makeup artists from different parts of the world who had come. But in the process, everything went great. The reviews were great, but eventually I got conned of a lot of money. And I think I was recovering and I went straight down into the dumps again. And this time it was really deep down. And this had just happened, I'd say, around the time a year after my dad's death. And I lost my dad to cancer, which again was another really hard journey in terms of, for our family, for me and everything. So those 2 years when I was 32, 33, I think were my darkest days and when I say darkest days, it was literally to a point where physically I was going through something called as adrenal fatigue. And I'd lost my speech, like I'd lost about 80% of my speech. I lost about 70% of my memory. Like I had something called as fibromyalgia, which was basically I was overworking myself. Also, the whole thing was the want to prove myself that, I was getting into this new line and not having acceptance from family or all of that. Like I really drove myself to prove a point, maybe to my family first, but also to cut something out for me. And I think that really took a toll. And it ended up in this whole, mess a burnout that I'd created for myself. And while I was there, I was kind of like looking for different ways to get out. And I was so desperate. I was like, anything will do, And I started seeking out to a lot of like alternative healing modules. And that's when I started finding new ones. And then I feel that's where like the whole journey started. And it's been quite a process where I feel once you start enjoying that, it started as self-help, but I think now it's more like peeling different layers of me, and it's just become a part of me now. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Well, I think the first part, right? Like I told you, when I decided to quit, I don't think I would have ever quit my corporate world. In fact, the joke at home was like my husband would retire, but then I would be working, and so we will just, I'll follow him wherever, I'll figure out jobs, and that was the
Yeah.
attitude. And then I decided to quit. That first 6 months is the most difficult because I can relate with what you're saying. I remember calling my mom and saying, I'm going to become a podcaster. She said, news odvana.
News Sodana.
It's like, are you going to read news? It's like, you're going to interview people. Where will the money come from? And I'm like, hello, let me figure this.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that conversation that happened. And then I'm not a podcaster. I just have interest in it. I listen, just like how the makeup bit, right? Like I listen to a lot of podcasts and I feel like there can be a better storytelling about one's journey, especially when you're going through a reboot. But also there's whole relationship with money, and that's why I ask this question more consciously. The relationship with money comes in because you sort of become addicted to that pay
Yeah.
that comes every month.
Yeah.
And that addiction is a long addiction I had for 25 years.
Right.
And it's hard to get rid
To
of
let
addictions
go.
like that.
Yeah.
And so you have to then really step back and question things like, what are your priorities? What are your values? What kind of relationship you want to have with money? Are you going to seek validation? Or so it sort of helped me step back and then see, okay, this is how we're going to go explore now.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And I can relate with how you said, I'm sure yours was much more tougher because there was death and there was loss and all of that, plus a new town.
Yeah.
Oh God, that's a different ballgame in itself. New friends and new people.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to go through to step back. But the first step, what I found in the self discovery process, is not easy and rosy. It is like hard.
Yeah, it
It's very
shakes
hard.
your soul, right?
Yeah.
It's like okay, you've been in this comfort zone for so long, now
Yeah.
get out of it. I used to also be because I used to party so much, I used to shop a lot.
Oh God, tell me about
I used
that.
to shop so much because every party I had to wear a new outfit. I had to wear new shoes, new jewelry, right? Because it was also coming from a small town. The validation from outside was so important of wanting to fit in and things like that. And I think when that shift happened, one of the things was like, I don't have the money to pay my rent. I remember there were days when, I was like, I've struggled to even like buy myself dinner at times. I've been through that stage as well. And and I remember the first 2 months because I was so used to spending, I had maxed out my credit card. And I remember being in my apartment in Bombay and being like, okay, this can go two ways. I either pull up my socks and not shop. And it was almost like a task that I set up for myself. And I didn't shop for the next 2 years. Like not 2 years, I think 3 years, I just didn't shop. And it was a way to like reset my whole thing, and it kind of worked. And I think the balance that I achieved in terms of like say shopping, that was something incredible, where I think then I just started valuing things that I really wanted, as opposed to just buying things because that was coming from a void from somewhere inside. And yeah, I think the money thing, I remember things changing. And of course, money was difficult in the initial years of it. It wasn't like a steady thing where I started making a big buck. But I think I also believe that if you're really passionate about something and if you really give it your 100%, money is just so secondary that it'll just follow you no matter what. Like I said, even if you're a waiter serving a coffee thing, if you're doing that, money will find its way to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like you lead with that as a goal, but it'll come.
Yeah.
Because there's so much passion in what we're doing, things will come. Things will
will
start
come,
falling
yeah.
in place. And it'll come and gradually, it'll come in very momentous ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is a very interesting journey. But that's also hard, right? Like to go through this rock bottom phase. And I think you don't have to really quit your job to go through this. You could even experience this
Yeah.
when you're working. But
Yeah.
when you go that way to that rock bottom stage, it's like holding a mirror on a naked self.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that,
Yeah.
I remember I used to shop a lot. Like, Sandhya, I cannot tell you. There were no credit cards because the husband is a very nice guy. So he believed in the philosophy of no loans. And thank God he did that. Because I swipe and buy, I used to, like crazy. So when I quit the job, I remember no more shopping is what I said. Okay, because
Yeah.
there's no money, I'll have to save for this
Yeah.
podcast. We'll have to figure out. And then I started taking clothes out. There were clothes with tags.
On it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And then I said, okay, no, we're going to figure this out in a different way.
Yeah.
Once you go through that, then comes the step of internalizing. Which is even more difficult.
Harder.
It's even more harder. So tell me your journey there. How did you go about this whole internalizing? Really creating an awareness of who you are, questioning some of that, because that's where it starts. You become your own best critic, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I think of what I remember is me being called angry ever since I was a child. Temper is right at the tip of the nose, and being
I think it's the
constant.
Mangalore water.
Must be.
I'm telling you.
But it's like just being constantly being called at. And I think I met my partner when I was 27, 28, yeah. And I think he did a great job at showing me the mirror. And I think we consciously, unconsciously become our parents. Mostly, like at least for me, it's my mom who we kind of, tend to subconsciously imitate, and whoever, even though we don't want to be that, we end up being that. And I think he started showing me the mirror that, you are becoming, or do you see these things about yourself? And initially it was very annoying. I think it took me years to be like, you don't tell me who I am. Like, it's really pissing off when somebody's telling, because you somewhere deep down you know that, right? um, but I guess somewhere having that the point where I think I got to know about my depression, and when the help started, I think mentally I was in a place to accepting things and wanting a change for myself. And again, I think my one big shift had happened when I was 25, when I was doing that transition. But the next thing was when I was 32, when, my dad's death, the big, the swindling of money, all that happened when I was 32. And I was going through another turmoil inside. And the diagnosis also kind of came around the same time. And I think wanting to get out of that situation, of not being miserable, right? And I'm like, what is it going to take for me to get out of this and have a more peaceful life? And I think that's where the introspection kind of starts. And then you start listening to things that are being told to you, like you're this, you're that, why don't I just understand, So I think it started off there, but of course, with journeys of like through therapy, through all the different modules of healing that I went through, I started also getting very curious in terms of like listening to more of like, say, people who wrote about like self-help, or even in terms of like therapy in general. Like I listened to a lot of like psychiatrists, like YouTube podcasts, you pretty much name it. But it was more from a curiosity of, just getting to know more in terms of how to manage anger, how to, get more connected to yourself and things like that. And I think all that, just listening to other people's journey and their stories and their narratives, really helped me to kind of understand that there was something deeper that was going, and I need to listen to it. And that started, I think, slowly opening out. And I think it's still a journey. I feel that's the best part of the whole process, is that you're constantly learning new things about yourself. You're just uncomplicating things for yourself. So yeah, it's become more like an everyday thing in terms of what did I notice about myself.
Yeah.
And it could even be like, once I step out from here, like, there is that introspection. For me, instead of introspection, I think I'd rather call it consciousness, in terms of being aware and being like fully present in terms of where you are, what you're doing, what you're saying, and what you're kind of emitting. So that's what it's kind of become right now. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, the toughest part in the introspection was, I agree with you, first of all, that it is an awareness journey, because you're consciously watching, and that's the tough part, right?
Yeah.
Like you consciously, you're not looking at someone else for the flaws, you're looking at yourself.
Yourself, yeah.
And that's even more tough, because
Yeah.
we're so engrossed with judging
Yeah.
others. To hold the mirror on to you is like a different thing. But when you go through that process, for me, it was everything from self-talk. Like I used to scold myself like crazy. Oh, what the hell were you thinking? Sort
Right.
of thing, to everything. You start looking at those patterns, and the patterns sort of guide you in the journey. Has that been your experience as well, or?
Absolutely, absolutely. We all have patterns, I guess. And for me, I think it was like one ting moment that comes and you're like, okay, and it like I saw a lot of like, just not like later on, but I think even in terms of like dating men, like, I had a certain pattern in terms of the kind of people that I'd attract, in terms of like the kind of the friends that I had, the kind of patterns. And I think you see a pattern to everything. And I think when you start seeing what kind of makes you miserable, then you kind of take a step back and then you're like, okay, this is what you need to cut off. This is not, making you happy internally. And then you want to kind of break that pattern and, or maybe
Differently.
approach it differently and see what that does to you. Yeah.
And during this process, you're still scaling up the business. How is that working out? Like, you still doing your workshops, you're still going as assistant makeup artist, or doing your own gigs. How is that balance like?
I think clarity, I would say, has definitely been, it's it's getting more clearer, like in terms of anything, in terms of like, with work or the bottom line is just to have peace within. I think that's my only sole purpose. I feel, of course, there are, um, sometimes people think that I'm going to become a sadhu or something. I'm like, that's not what it is. I just want inner peace.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I don't fancy a good holiday. I don't want money. All that is secondary for me. But I feel with this journey, what I'm seeking is just that inner calmness. And there's been more clarity with, say, work. I feel my external life has gotten very uncomplicated. I don't have to chase things anymore. Like it's more of setting an intent. Um, Also, the more inner work that I do, earlier it was about, we always said you have to do a lot of hard work, if you don't do hard work, and it was always about pushing yourself, killing yourself to achieve that thing. But I think now the approach is more about being in a more relaxed state of mind, putting that intent, doing the work that you need to do in terms of whatever XYZ, but not really killing yourself in that process. So I feel that is the approach, and I feel trying to achieve balance through that is the new approach that I'm kind of adapting when it comes to work, and it definitely has been working. The quality of work, the things that are coming to me is definitely way better, and life seems peaceful. Yeah.
Yeah. I cannot tell you, throughout this conversation, it's almost like I'm like 20 steps behind you. So I can relate with every bit of what you're saying. So, one of the things that I found was even things like your strengths and what you want to do aligned with your strengths. You sort of start looking at that very consciously. You sort of do like a Marie Kondo of your self, right?
I wish I was that with cleaning.
Because I saw that you sort of start decluttering things
Yeah.
and then saying no to things that
Yeah.
is not the right thing for you, because
Yeah.
you're in this journey of seeking peace.
Yeah.
And so you sort of say no to people, relationships,
Yeah.
jobs, and work of that kind. And that is what you're saying is clarity, because, and you're playing on your strengths.
Yeah.
You're also very consciously aware of your weakness and sort of seeing how to balance the whole thing and maneuver through, because there's so much ambiguity you're dealing with, isn't it, Sandhya?
There's definitely a lot of ambiguity. I think also that comes with the nature of our work. Because I think being a freelancer, and you're constantly making decision after decisions. And especially you can be busy 30 days a month in our work, and again, I think for me, the idea is to kind of do quality over quantity. And of course, you do quantity at a certain, timeline when, in that phase where you want to kind of put your name out. But for me, it's always been about quality after a particular point. I don't want to be doing 30 days of work. Those, even if it's 10 days, I want to do like good work. And it doesn't mean that I'm making lesser money. I'm maybe making 5 times more money because what I bring into each of the work is a lot more. I'm valuing myself a lot more higher. It also means that the clients who are kind of approaching me value my worth. So I feel that is a shift that I'm seeing what the universe is kind of like bringing into me. But ambiguity is definitely there because it's like you're not the only one making that decision. You're dealing with people at the end of the day. But it's decision after decision. So there is this part, I think it's Alan Watts, where he's talking about this guy who is being asked to, pick potatoes into two different baskets. And he's like, and before that, I think he's like, he's doing like a craftsman's thing where he's doing some furniture work, which is just like put your head to it and you finish that. But he's like, don't give me this job where I have to select the good potato and the bad potato, because how do you decide? It's every potato is pretty good, right? But you, to make that decision, it's like, it's so hard. And he's like, this is so much of, work, like mind whatever fucking work, sorry, but
No, I've got an A for my podcast.
So but that's what it is, like, I think freelancing, definitely, especially when you're cutting down on work, is harder. And even at my level right now, there's so many queries that come in. So sometimes it's like, and when I tell people that I'm honestly cutting down on work, people look at me as being like relaxed. But honestly, like, I know how much it takes to kind of the physical aspect of our job. It's very tiring. And I feel somewhere with my own personal journey, I put my body through so much of toll and stress and everything that I paid a very hefty price for it. And I feel I don't want to kind of take this body or life for granted. So I feel these are little things that setting boundaries, I think, in a way, has kind of like worked. And for me, the ambiguity of it is definitely difficult, but I feel it's been rewarding in a way that I take that step back and I'm like, why am I doing this? Do I need it? And like, is my soul happy? And if I get these questions answered, I think it's kind of easy to deal with that ambiguity. Yeah.
Because there's also then inner clarity as you go through it, and then you already have the passion.
Yeah.
So that's a lovely combination that comes together, isn't it? Like the clarity of
Thought.
along with the passion of what you're doing. When they come together,
Yeah.
it allows you, it's like some superpower you sort of walk with, to say no to things.
Say no to things, yeah. And I feel like I tell this to my students who come to the workshop, or my assistants as well, is that there are times when you get booked for a job, you take that up because you're like, you want the money, you want to be busy, you want, like, but it might not be the client that you are really very keen on taking. For whatever reasons, they keep you waiting, or they don't pay you well, or XYZ. There are 101 reasons of why you don't want to do that thing. My philosophy is simple. Like, if you don't feel 100% happy about being there, don't take it up. Because when you're there, you're not being your 100% happy self. You're cribbing, you're bitching, you're like, just like, okay, this pain in the ass. Then you come out of it, and you're creating a certain vibration where, you are, while you're sitting and waiting for that client, you're pretty much abusing the client in your head. I was like, don't do that. If you know that this client is going to make you work, you either don't take it up, or you negotiate with, which means better money or value for your time. You work that out. So at least when you're there, you're not being negative towards the whole thing. So I think for me, even filtering out work that way has helped, where I'll do it for the first time for the experience of it. But again, if something is not going the way that is going to give me happiness or peace of mind, or if someone's going to be painful, then, straight off it's like a no. Like, I'd rather be sitting at home doing something nourishing for my soul than being there and being in that, distress of like, why am I here?
What I found in this particular journey through the conversation also is the currency changed from money to you and your time,
Yeah.
right?
And energy.
Right?
Like, yeah.
And that allows you to start the power that it gives you to say no as against
Yeah.
money, and how you say no is a different
Yeah.
ball game itself,
Yeah, it's
isn't
a
it?
different equation, I feel, because a lot of times, again, with social media and everything, there's this need to post and be like, oh, I'm so busy and I'm so like, working all the time. And I think for a lot of them, that equates to money. I don't think so, because I've met a lot of people who've got the most active social media where they seem to be at least pretending or putting it out there to be like super happy, and but when you meet them in person there is so much of struggle behind, like in terms of money, in terms of the kind of work, in terms of all of that. And I feel there's so much of leverage that is being given to like this whole living up to the social media life. And I feel even if you just take that little step back and be like, okay, like, what is that I can change to like have a better equation, say, with my time and money and whatever makes me happy. I feel you are answering a big part of that. And then, of course, the next thing is to taking a step in that direction to change that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I found for me saying no is the toughest one. But what I found is you'll gradually sort of internalize that.
Yeah.
Because you'll probably do it the first time, second time a little reluctantly, third time even more reluctantly, and
Yeah.
fourth time it's like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
not for me. But it happens. It gives you that sense of clarity.
Clarity.
Right?
But I think we're also conditioned to be such people pleaser, no? It's like, oh, you have to be this
Yeah.
person at what cost? Like, even if that means that your own, you're destroying yourself and just saying that, yes, because I feel that's something that we all have in different degrees. And I feel over age, and I think over in terms of like the work and everything, you are able to differentiate between being a people pleaser for the sake of saying yes, and then you do that. And then when you start really taking care of yourself and what you need, then I feel you see the distinction in terms of, and you do it without guilt then.
Yeah.
And you do it in a way where it's not offending anybody, And I think finding that balance is so important, because, again, I know a lot of times, even myself, there were times when I used to say no, but it would be like very like headmistress type no. So it might not have been the most nicest way of saying no, but I think it just that I didn't know how to say no better, as being extremely stern and cold. But I guess over the years, I think communication and changing the way you communicate, and again, coming back to the energy in which you do that, right? If you're carrying that guilt inside, the guilt is going to come out, and that is going to translate in the way you're talking.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important for you to be sure about what you're feeling internally, and then the whole process of it becomes so much more easier, where the other person will be able to understand your perspective or as to where you're saying that no from.
Yeah. It's also, it allows you to explore the vulnerable side of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh?
And that uncomfortable feeling when you're saying no. And I think just noticing that what that brings in, because a lot of times we go through that uncomfortable, like a churn, but then we're just trying to like
Settle
push
it down.
it. Yeah. Push it with like something, and we don't really get into a self inquiry mode in terms of, okay, what did I actually feel? Why is that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling? What does that say about me? Is there something that I need to, introspect? Yeah.
Now, in this process, one thing that I've found very helpful in the self discovery process is to have the right support system.
Yeah.
How did you go about? Because when you hit rock bottom, did you have the right support system, or you started building that support system very consciously afterwards?
I think my partner, my husband, he definitely was like one of, like I'd say, one person that if I could fall back on, it was him, because I think he's seen me through my darkest days of like, but also being there. And I think living with somebody who's depressed is not easy. And I think he was there, he's still there unconditionally for me. And I think that was definitely I would say, a big part of my support system, because I was like, I went through a phase where, even talking about depression for that matter, because I remember when I was 32, I was so relieved to find that this was a diagnosis. And I was just like, I remember sharing that with my friends. And a lot of us, I think, lack the emotional empathy or even the intelligence to uh, reciprocate to something like that, because we don't know how, because at least in our everyday lives we've not been taught. Either it's a very awkward silence of, okay, I heard you but I don't know, but you can pretty much see it, or it's like, it's okay, you'll be fine, and I think I went through that where friends didn't really understand. And of course, there was judgment and there was all of that, right? And again, understanding the degree of the level in which, you've been through that, that is, I think, very, very hard for people to understand unless they've gone through their own journeys of that. So that was definitely hard, but I think the more work that I did, I feel that universe kind of got people that were like-minded. I think I started connecting to my soul family in some way, and that's why I say that my external world started changing the minute I started doing this work. And it wasn't like I was looking for them. One of the this is like sometimes like it kind of gets me like the goosebumps, wherein I remember learning this theta course. Like I do something called as a theta healing, and my healer was like, okay, why don't you do this? It's one of the self-healing modalities, and it's been fascinating in terms of the way, it's worked on me for so many years. I've been doing it for the last like 5 years or so. And I think beginning of COVID, I was going through like this crazy turmoil. There was a trigger at home, and I was just finding it so difficult. I reached out to my therapist, and somehow it was just unsettling for 2 months. And I was like, okay, maybe it's time to do this. And I did the course, and I remember we have this group, and going through something like the list of people who are there, and I saw a familiar name, and it was Pavitra Rajkumar, this friend of mine I've known her since I was 25, and we lost in touch. And the next thing I know, I see her there, and we've not spoken for like, I think 8 years or so. And again, like I just connected, and she was a theta healer herself, and she'd become a healer. She was into a corporate journey herself, and I was amazed to be able to connect, and out of my wildest dreams, I wouldn't have thought that I'd be able to connect to her. And that's what I'm saying. It's like there are such crazy things that have happened where it almost feels like magic. And I think, especially when me and Pavitra, because she's also on this, she's a healer herself, and when we talk, we talk about these magic that has unfolded in our lives. And sometimes when people who are not in that journey, when they sit next to us and when they're listening, they're like, oh, these girls are crazy, those spiritual cuckoo people that they're like hoo-has. We're like, we don't care. But being able to see the kind of things unfold in front of us, it's quite crazy. And I think the journey itself has brought me to a lot of people. And I think also when I seek out a lot of different experiences, like example, the last trip that I did to Peru, I was introduced to like 22 people who are on a self-discovery journey, and everybody came from different walks of life, and everybody had a story. And it's quite fascinating, and they spoke the same language as you did, which for me, if I were outside and if I talk about anything more than 5 minutes, they look at like, okay, this one's crazy. But I think you will find your people,
Yeah.
people that you can share the same language, somebody you can fall back on, and somebody who won't judge you for whatever you're sharing, in terms of, even if you're saying that I killed someone, right? And being able to listen to you and not be judgmental. I think I'm blessed to find that space or connections around me, and it's happened organically, I'd say.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a conscious thing of like, when you go through this, you also feel the kind of people that you don't want to be surrounded by, and noticing that, and okay, this person made me feel this way, and not really cutting off, but just taking that, going away from that, and really seeing if you want to like move away from this energy. And yeah,
Yeah.
so it's happened consciously, unconsciously, yeah, I would say.
Yeah, but I found this whole journey to be fascinating because you never go back to look at how your mind works. You look at how your body works, you look at how
Absolutely.
tired you feel
Yeah.
and all that. But you never reflect on how your mind works. You
Yeah.
don't have that conscious effort you spend to go back to see, oh, this is how my. And it's a fascinating world.
World, yeah.
It's like Alice
Yeah.
in Wonderland kind of
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
Yeah. I
Right.
think, yeah, we do like exercises for a physical body, and I think, okay, maybe therapy or going on an inward journey for your mind. But I think also, I feel we also do not see in terms of what our soul needs.
Yeah.
That's another thing which I feel is so much more, needed, and like so much more attention that you need to kind of like give to, in terms of what you're feeling overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to completely switch gear now
Yeah.
to your journey as a makeup artist. Now, that's been running in parallel and thriving as well because you've been very creative. You've been creative in terms of pushing boundaries for yourself as well as really making an impact as well, right? Like some of the workshops that you conduct are spaces where you bring the best from outside and expose the world here to the best. In some ways, I feel that's like your paid forward in some ways, your way of expressing a paid forward. How has that journey been? Like, what's been instrumental in from where you started? Because you started with just a novice going for classes to understand, like how I started with the podcasting. But from there to today, that's a journey. How did you go about that bit? Like, was that like pushing your boundaries every time or like rediscovering yourself or how did that happen?
I think I am somebody who gets bored very easily.
Oh my god.
That's
Meet your friend here.
I'm very,
My-
yeah, yeah. And I think for me, even when it comes to creating a look, like, example, if you're working on the same celebrity every day, you can do the same thing, make your life easy. But I am somebody who gets bored of things so easily. So for me, it's always breaking my own boundaries. It's not about competing with somebody else or any of that. Um, I do have people that I'm inspired by, just not creatively in terms of their work, but I think even in terms of people, like who they are, what they bring in, and their mannerisms or the way they talk, So I guess the workshop space was a culmination of everything, and whatever that kind of helped me in terms of becoming who I was. I think, again, fairly in terms of the rate in which I grew, I feel that was a much faster rate compared to, say, anybody else in the industry. But purely being the person that I like seeking out new experiences purely out of my own boredom, I feel that I was always like looking for new stuff. I was like, okay, fine, I've learned this. Now, next. And I think while my initial years, I would always go do a lot of workshops, because even as makeup or any field, I feel things are constantly changing. And when I went to these workshop, it boosted my confidence to another level. And more than that, I realized that when I was seeing somebody in person, I was just not learning the skills or their tips and all of that, but I was also getting to learn so much more beyond in terms of what makes them, their personality, theirs. And there was so much to learn even from that. And I think the idea of workshop pretty much started off there, one aspect of it, why it's still a physical thing and not an online thing. And I think the second part of it is that in India, I feel beauty is something still we're very dated. And again, in terms of the schools, wherever, I think this is just not in India, but I think overall, the way in which beauty is taught is something that has been formatted, people replicated, blah blah blah, a couple of years ago. I would say it's pretty redundant. What you learn, you just use certain bits of it, but everything else you learn on the job, and it'll take you years to do that. But I wish there was a system where certain things about the freelancing life was taught, like small things like, when we go on a shoot, it's like, I didn't know how to put a mood board. I came from a finance background. I had no artistic, creative background at all, other than the fact that, my hands were creative. I used to paint and things like that, but I didn't know how to do a mood board. But it is one of the most important things in our job to at least be able to put what we're thinking, what the client is thinking, and that is still something that wasn't taught. So I was like, when the workshop was happening, the way I've designed the workshop is things that really help me, things that will really help any makeup artist when they get on the real side of doing things. Example, in terms of like setting rates, no one really talks about that because they're so, uncomfortable talking about it. Like, your timelines in terms of, do you have a shift, or, how do you, a lot of things which, especially in the freelance life, I feel everyone wants to be hush hush about the products that they use, or the kind of, the way they handle their business. At least when I got in, like, everyone was so secretive to an extent that they'd even poured like a foundation bottle into like another foundation bottle so that they wouldn't know that, but what you're using, but you don't realize that what you're creating is all inside your head. It's not the products. You can have the same products, but you'll create such different things out of it, right? So I think changing that mindset, even with, say, the newer generation of kids, is because also I've realized in India, especially, the people that are coming for beauty, into beauty, are people who want to kind of largely make like a quick buck, because they know that the kind of like the bridal market is always thriving, and it's something that you don't really have to. So that's a primary goal for a lot of people coming in. There are very few people who come from, say, example, who've done like arts or creative, like a visual communication or any of that, who are coming into the thing of like makeup. Whereas internationally, people, the level of creativity is definitely at a different scale. But I feel they've been guided. There's so many different mediums where I feel here that is lacking. We do have equally creative people, or more, I would say, but that guidance is kind of like lacking. And the right format in which, like, what do you see? Because I think culturally also we grew up seeing Bollywood films, and our references are just limited to that. So I think changing the way we look at that, it's just like a very small step in terms of having to start that. And I think also my interaction every time I travel, I interacted with a lot of like international artists, both at different levels, starting level, mid level, people who are extremely famous. I've been able to like even work with them on different jobs. And I think seeing their creative process and learning from that, adapting that, and getting to understand, even the markets over there in terms of, okay, what does this artist do? Like example for Met, where we meet and I'm like, their process is so different from ours in terms of like, they get a brief like a month in advance and they're working on it. For us, it's literally 2 days before when we get to see the outfit. But it's so different. But what is that we can change about our creative thing? And unfortunately, beauty education here has been just about how to contour, how to put foundation. It doesn't really evoke the thinking part of the creative process, which is a sad part. But I think that is a shift that I want to kind of bring in. And that's why the influence of like, say, or even like bringing about, say, international artists, or even me going and doing those jobs and getting to know more about that is purely from that perspective. Yeah.
I think it's useful as well, and I can relate with that with the corporate world and the process I went through in the learning journey. Because
Yeah.
when you observe others, you're not just observing the skills they come with, it's also the how aspect, the subtlety in which they're able to get things done,
Yeah.
or like put those skills into
Yeah.
practice. You learn from all of that
Yeah.
to sort of then say, ha, I can see myself taking that bit,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that's the relative learning bit that you talk about. The other thing that I also noticed was you don't limit yourself when you go for workshops to just makeup. You go through the peripheral touch points as well. Like for me, for example, in the podcasting space, like I'm very curious to now understand how videography works. Because as much as I enjoy the podcasting bit, these bits of how to make it better and better and better is
Right.
important. And I thought that is something you've done really beautifully as well. Is that a very conscious way of going through the process, Sandhya?
Yeah, I think just being curious. I feel my 7, 8 years of depression put me in a dark space where everything, like emotion wise, everything kind of shut down. I couldn't feel a lot of things. And I think when I started feeling things, I think curiosity was one of it. And I think to keep that curiosity going, I think it also kind of keeps me alive. So I think just being curious has been such a important part of the journey. And be it, does it have to do with makeup? It just anything and everything. Like if something just, okay, there's something interesting, and I'm like, just like to know, because there's so much out there, right? And you never know how it'll influence your kind of work, your kind of everyday being. And that's another thing, again with my workshop. Like I remember, it is a holistic workshop where there are things that is not really related to beauty, but we do something like a morning meditation. And my friend Pavitra again is a part of the whole thing, where she asks these deep questions about bringing things out. And it's quite powerful in terms of how people feel the way they feel when they get out, or at least they start thinking in certain direction. And a part of the workshop was influenced by One of my other workshops that I went to, which was a Qigong and a Tai Chi workshop, which happened with one of the spiritual teachers. And I remember when we were looking up at that course, there were certain videos, and it was all the students were like, we've been coming back to this for 15 years, 20 years. And we were like, okay, why are they coming back to do the same thing? And it's only when I went and experienced his 15-day thing that you can do that workshop at any point, any number of times, because it's going to evoke different things in you and purely depending on where you are.
Wow.
And I think that is the thing that I've, in a way, attempted to bring into the 7-day workshop as well, or anything that we're going to be teaching in the workshop space, wherein it's not about, because when you're teaching it from a step by step thing of like, here is how you do it, you keep this whole format the same. And again, out of my own boredom, every workshop is different. Like, we're constantly adding things in. And I think there's inspiration, there's beauty in everything. And I think it's just about being able to take in and fit in what you are inspired by and making it your own. So I think the curiosity is what is definitely kind of helping. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more on the job front. What's it like to work with the who's who of the movie world?
I think there are both ups and downs to it. I really feel super grateful because my childhood was spent, because there was so much free time in the village, right? And like weekends would be like Saturday, Sunday, sitting in the fields and being like, I want to get out of here and I want to be in the big city, and like, just dreaming and being so hopeful about life. And I think being in a space with like the who's who, and I know that there are so many people wanting to be in that space as I really feel extremely grateful and fortunate. And I feel there's definitely the ups of it, as there's so much that you get to learn from them in terms of, different attributes of why they're who they are. Like example, Deepika, like for me, there's so much to learn from her on a personal level, like so disciplined, like another level of, she is a Marie Kondo, if I have to say, like
Oh, is it?
like a clean freak. And so it's almost like, there's so many different sides of them that you get to see, and like the business side of it, the discipline side of it, the temperament side of it. There's so much, and just not from her, but like even from everybody else, like from Anushka, and like most of the beautiful women that I work with. There's always so much to learn. And of course, the downside of it, which is, I think no one really tells you that makeup and hair is such a physical job, and especially when you're working with such big celebrities where there's so much going on in their lives, and you are the first point of contact where you're taking in so much of their energy as well, and you're in their close spaces of just the environment, and the schedule, the time zones that you kind of like work in. And I think that's something that I didn't really know about before I got into it, just not with celebrities, but overall. It's physically very, very, very tiring. There are times when assistants come and they can't do the physical part of it. And even like mentally, it's stressful because it's people management plus your creative work management plus, it's a lot of it, plus the travel and all of that. So it's about, again, finding a balance, I think. But overall, super grateful to have the experience, because I feel everything has kind of taught me so many things in different ways. Yeah.
Any advice for the audience? So my audience are basically mid-career professionals who are, either the seed has been sown already, or I'm hoping the seed gets sown eventually. But an advice to career professionals on how to maneuver through a holistic personal transformation. Are there like top 5 tips from Sandhya sort of thing that you can give away?
I don't know about tips, but I think what worked for me is, I think, identifying, what are your interests? It can be anything. And I know a lot of my own friends, and I think 30s is that age, 30s to like 45 is that age when you're kind of like going through that journey of like, am I in the right space? Am I doing the right thing? But I think primarily identifying what your interests are. Because for me, like, example, I loved makeup. Like, I loved doing makeup on myself. I loved doing it on other people, even before I became a makeup artist. And even if I was not doing it, like just looking at somebody and mentally doing it on somebody, saying that, okay, this girl can do this. So I knew that there was this deep connection. I think finding that deep connection, which could be a hobby, they say pick your three closest hobby, or, and for me, I think it's definitely, it was makeup, it was dance for sure. And the third thing was like hosting. And so my other, I think, if I was allowed and if I didn't really grew up in like a setup that I grew up in, I'd be a dancer. That was my, like a deeper calling. But that's something I do it as a hobby now. Like I love, like my soul really thrives when I'm dancing. And I think the other thing was, I always wanted to like open a bar. I think that's my ultimate goal. Like that's the aim basically.
You should join my care pack. So we're sort of designing a care pack of the inner circle of friends where we're there for each other, but we're in a lovely place. And anyway,
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about
yeah,
that.
so
Yeah. But I think identifying, and these all three that I shared, like for me, I love hosting people. I come from a family where all my uncles are into bar and restauranting, not the fancy type, but a typical, Udupi, that kind of, but I know that like eventually I want to start a bar somewhere, that's my retirement plan. But these are like, and I love fitness, so I think if any of these things don't really work out, like I always have something that I can jump into which is like closer to my heart. And another thing right now is also for me about the whole self discovery, healing, and so identify what your interests are in. And the other day my friend was like, oh, for me it's scrolling on social media. I was like, yeah, maybe that's what your calling is. But I think just putting those pointers down and then seeing what are the jobs that you can kind of really
explore.
explore in that space. Because again, there's not just one part of that, there's so much that things open out to, right? Because in each of that, like example, say dancing, or you can get into being a fitness coach, you can get into dancing, you can do so many, you can start your own classes, but exploring that. And then again, what resonates to you in while you're doing that resonation visually, what is that you can visualize out of all of that? I think I'm a very visual person. I think it's so important for me to be like, okay, I can see myself doing this. I think if you can see yourself, envision yourself doing that, I feel 50% of your thing is done. And I think letting go of that qualms of, I am supposed to be in this box, this is what I'm supposed to do, trying to fit in, trying to please, trying to be like, this is what is expected out of me, and not really listening to your own inner voice. Listening to that inner voice, number one, that is, and being fearless somewhere. I guess it's just like a combination of all these couple of things, and I think you're good to go. And it's going to be scary as hell.
Yeah.
But I think when that uncomfortable feeling eases out, you'll figure a way to do it. And I think to be shameless, to be dedicated, and just focusing on that one thing that you've set out yourself for, I think is very important. Rather than being like, oh, I'll do my day job and I'll do this. That never works, because it just like your focus is in two different places, and you're always like, okay, I have this other thing to take the comfort of,
Yeah.
So that's, I think, I don't know if that's a tip, but it's just like, yeah.
No, I think these are very powerful advices because we don't internalize it. Like we hear this often, spread across as messages. This is the time of these short bites. You contextualize it to your situation,
Yeah.
but you don't look at the bigger perspective over here. So I think every bit of it, whether it is identifying your interests, exploring, taking the plunge, like
Yeah.
complacency versus the plunge, they're not best friends.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to break away from one and become a friend of the other. But when you do that, the journey is even more beautiful.
Yeah.
So these advices are like bang on, super. One last bit, what does attitude makeover mean to you?
Um, I guess for me, it's definitely constant self discovery. And I think it's something that I wish more and more people start exploring, because I think it's a constant journey. You're never like there, or you found yourself, or and I think that's the beauty of it, because you start exploring different sides of you. And I feel with age, and especially I think with being women, again, we're conditioned to so many things of being a mother, being a wife, and yada yada, of like so many things, right? Of doing work at home and work in general, that we forget who we really are. And if you remember yourself as a child, we were such free, careless, carefree, fearless people that we somewhere shut that down because of the conditioning. And then we try to fit in and become something else, somebody else, and we lose ourselves. And I think attitude makeover is all about rediscovering of who you were, or finding that with a new balance in life. I think everything and anything that happens to you is for a reason. If you're just introspect a little bit, you will be able to, even the bad things, or even things that you're not. Example for me, anger, like, going through that journey and finding whatever came out through that. And I've found new parts of me which never existed, and there's so much more appreciation to myself. There's so much more self-love. And I feel we lose out on that self-love as we get older. And I think it's about just reconnecting to that. Yeah. And I don't think that is something that'll, like, how people get very underconfident as they age. I feel for me it's the other way around. I don't feel age is a defying thing. I feel so much more connected. I feel so much more confident. I think, and even with my own beauty and things like that, like there is a different connection that I found, which I want everybody to explore. And again, women, of course, the usual conditioning, but I think also men are struggling on a different level these days, because they don't really share, they're not vulnerable, and everything is like bottled up, and we have to be that man. But I think overall, just reconnecting to your inner child and having loads and loads and loads and loads of self-love to yourself. Yeah.
So, Sandhya, thank you so much for making time, coming to the studio through your busy schedule. It's an honor and a delight, and what a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for being so honest in this conversation.
Thank you, Sauj, for having me. I think I had the most fun. For once, not really talking about top 5 trends, because I think makeup artists can only answer that. What's your favorite 5 lipstick? What's the latest trends? And in middle of COVID, I'm like, there is no trend.
So when I launched the first podcast, I got my friends together. A lot of them I have a very eclectic mix of friends.
Yeah.
And so they were like, they're not so interested in the subject per se, because they are more into these short bites. So they're like, you didn't set your hair properly. Where's the makeup? You didn't put any makeup. And I'm like, I don't put makeup. And then you didn't set your hair. It's the conversation. Listen to the conversation. And I can understand what you're saying. It's come a long way now. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Absolute pleasure.